Reading practice. Why that matters. Key takeaways. Definition of life are notoriously hard to pin down. The organism is always and forever bound to its state of precariousness, and eventually that precariousness must win. It always wins. To be able to be alive is to be able to die. Understanding life is what can die as has a personal and even a spiritual valence. Definition of life are notoriously hard to pin down. Is a virus alive? It has a kind of metabolism, and in the sense it reproduces by spreading. Is crystal alive? It certainly grows. What about a virus, which can reproduce and mutate, but only if it can find a living cell to use as a host? Scientific definition of life tend to focus on things like reproduction, metabolism, heredity, and evolution. But there is another more basic property of life that has profound consequences for its study and which I want to explore today: the capacity to die. While this may seem obvious, reframing life in terms of that reveals some of the biggest philosophical and scientific problems with the way we think about living system. You are more than your DNA. Focusing on biomolecular mechanism of life has yielded remarkable insight into what happens inside cells. However, this emphasis over the last 70 years on molecules such as the deoxyribonucleic acid has produced a kind of myopia that can lead researchers to blind themselves to a critical insight. Life is not just a molecules. It cannot be reduced to the interaction of a set of molecular actors. Instead, life is really about organization, which is why, alongside the emphasis on biochemistry, there has always been a focus on life as an organism. An organism is a whole that is also wholly invested in interaction with the environment. Biomolecules would never take on the activities they play in the cell were it not for the higher level organizations the cell makes possible, and this is where that comes in. Biologists Humberto Manurana and Francisco Varela developed the concept of autopoiesis in the 1970s and the 1980s to describe the essential character of life as an organism. Autopoiesis means self-producing. The term which Maturana and Valera coined referred to a kind of strange loop that occurs in living system whereby the processes and products needed for an organism to survive must be created by the processes and products needed for the organism to survive. The classic example is the cell membrane, whose presence is required to create a very compound that maintains it. Over the next year, I will be writing more about autopoiesis as it forms parts of a new research program on life and information funded by the Templeton Institute. The key point for today is to understand that one thing Maturana and Varela wanted to focus on with the autopoiesis was its intrinsic capacity to end. To be an autopoietic system is to constantly face death. To be alive is always to live in a precarious condition, as Farrell called it. You, me, a butterfly, a single cell organism, all life must constantly be at work to produce and maintain itself. Life can never take a rest from the internal activities it must carry out to do that. And this self production and self maintenance must work on a remarkable array of scales. At the molecular level, the ribosomes that drive life's nanomachinery must never halt. At the cellular level, the membrane can never stop its work of monitoring and adjusting the flux of compound into the cell. At the system level is more complex life. Various components of plant or animal must always be synchronous and synchronizing, or else what? We know the answer to that question. For it drives so much of our higher animal psychology. Rest, we die. The organism is always and forever bound to its states of precariousness, and eventually that precariousness must win. It always wins. To be alive is to be able to die. Life is not a blender. This emphasis on that as the definition of life serves many roles and will be useful for many purposes. On a on a purely scientific level, it can help us understand which features of organism and their organization to focus on. This is important for the Templeton project I am beginning because it sharpens our focus on how information can serve to keep an organism viable. Example, self-maintenance. On a philosophical level, to focus on that refers a key problem with the reductionist description of life that rely on what is called the machine metaphor. For reductionists, life is nothing but a cell set of molecular mechanisms. We are therefore nothing but biochemical machines. This is a fundamental mistake because while a machine can be switched off, there can be no off button for life. Even seeds that remain dormant for years are not off, like my blender is off when I'm not using it. Life is not a machine. Finally, understanding life as what died has a personal or even spiritual valence. It gives the life to the strains of transhumanism, techno-religious fantasy, but conquering that. While I am all for the extending life, if I can, I would never think to avoid its end. Instead, what I long for is the fullest experience I can muster out of this strange trip. Then, when that does come, it will greet us like the old friend it has always been. Thank you.